on episode 237 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. Today we speak to expert and consultant Bernard Desmidt, and he's going to teach you the 5 different disciplines of high-performing teams. It's all about high-performing teams today, folks. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the 3 domains of leadership, those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out today. If you are listening real time, I have some great news. Website is back, fully functional at we'll call it 95% solution now. Still a few things on the back end that needs to get squared away, but all the pages are live. The show notes are coming back online slowly. Just be a little bit patient with us with the show notes. There are over 300 different posts of show notes in the back catalog that we just need to square away a little bit, but they are actually there. You can easily search for an episode if you're looking for a specific episode, and in the near future, using the episode number will return. So I'm happy to say website is back up and running, and life is finally good. I did take the opportunity to redesign the front homepage. So let me know. Let me know if you like the homepage the way it looks now. Vice the last one. Anyway, that's today's public service announcement. And now let's get into what we're here for. And that's 5 disciplines of high-performing teams. And, of course, this goes right into domain 2, leading our teams. And this is what we strive to achieve, high-performing teams, right? That's what us as leaders, that's what we want, that's what we're looking for. And in this episode, we talk about those 5 different disciplines. We talk about trust and competency and how they're utilized and why psychological safety is important. And we have to understand, how we go about maneuvering through these different disciplines. And then in the end with Bernard, we talk about the hiring process. And let me tell you, he has a very different view on how we should use the hiring process to bring new team members into our high-performing teams. Now, if this podcast episode really strikes a chord with you, what I'd like to let you know is I'm going to take a minute to explain our Leader Growth Mastermind, because guess what? There's aspects of Bernard's book, and you're going to hear a bit of it in the podcast today, that gets utilized as part of the core content within the mastermind community. You see, each month we take a domain, whether that's leading yourself, leading your team, or leading your organization, and we have a theme for that domain for the month, and we dive into various bits of content. So if you're listening real time, September 2022 is all about leading yourself, and we're talking about leader self-care. So we've been talking about health and fitness, mindfulness and meditation, and so on and so forth in the mastermind. Well, later we will be going into high-performing teams, and guess what? We will be discussing the 5 disciplines. That's how the mastermind content is created, and that's how it works. So if you're interested in joining us and you're ready to level up your leadership game and be best leader possible, then go to leaddon'tboss.com/mastermind. And I look forward to seeing you there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's enough for me. It's time for you to listen to this great podcast interview with myself and Bernard Desmidt and talking about the 5 disciplines of a high-performing team. Bernard, my friend, welcome to the show. So good to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Scott, and privileged to be speaking with you.
So we're talking today about your book, Team Better Together, with the most interesting to me subtitle, 5 Disciplines of High-Performing Teams. Now, here at Moving Forward Leadership / Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, I talk about 3 domains of leadership. One being leading yourself. I'll skip over 2. And then number 3 is leading your organization. And then, of course, number 2 is leading your team, which this book kind of fits perfectly in there. And we aim for peak performance across those 3 domains. So you, sir, are a great fit tonight. Out of the gate, what I'd like to know is, what are the 5 disciplines? Why those 5? Why not some others?
Yeah, interesting. And I suppose it may help just to give a bit of context of where were they born from,
Sure.
And what made me come to them. I for a long time I've been an executive team coach for over 20 years, and I was fascinated, and still am fascinated, with what I call the 80-60-20 paradox. And why is it that 80% of leaders claim to spend 60% of their time in teams, yet only 20% of the time of those teams flourishing? And what is that distinction between a high-performing, flourishing team and one that just functions, or one that just flounders? And again, these metaphors help until they don't, Scott. But if we look at high-performing athletes, and I'm going to stop there with that metaphor, because teams and athletes have something in common, not everything in common. But a high-performing athlete, I put to you, just like a high-performing team, is not distinguished by its talent. It's distinguished by its discipline. And when I mean by discipline, it's the uncompromising, the unwavering commitment to maintaining a rhythm and a cadence of performance. And if we look at these disciplines as a cadence of performance, because these disciplines are not just once in a time. These are lifelong, unending, universal disciplines. And so, would it help if I just sort of speak through each of the 5, give you a high level sort of distinction?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll kind of do some deep dives.
Yeah, fantastic. So if we look at this, and it may help to distinguish a group from a team, but one of the distinctions is, and the first discipline is what I refer to, the discipline to discover, and teams distinguish themselves on discovering and knowing, not assuming, knowing the mandate they've been commissioned with. Groups determine their own mandate. Teams know the mandate their stakeholders have commissioned them with. What does that mean? That they know what their stakeholders appreciate about the team. They know what the stakeholders are looking for from the team, and they know deeply what changes the stakeholders are looking for the team to make. So that's the first, and I cannot tell you, in almost all instances, when I start working with a team, the mandate is more assumed than known. So we test that. Then, and these disciplines in the work I do, typically we work in the sequence. The second discipline is what I refer to as the discipline to declare. And what that is about is the declaration of the common uniting purpose this team exists. Teams start from their why. Groups start from what they do. Teams start from why they do it. And when we look at the declaration of purpose, it answers the question: for what sake has this team come to being? Why does it exist? What's the cause it's serving greater than itself? When we and this is when teams start moving towards a shared and common understanding of their reason for existence, we then move into what I call the third discipline, and that's the discipline to design. And we're designing our culture, our ways of working. Yeah. And here's the thing, Scott. Teams rise and fall on the quality of their working relationships. So in this discipline, we're designing how do we engage and relate with one another, whether we're teaming together or apart, or with whoever else. And that's the embodiment of our culture. Then and only then do we move into the fourth discipline, which is the discipline to deliver. And that's around answering the question: what are those collective performance goals each team member holds themselves individually and collectively accountable for, and which can only be achieved working interdependently? Now, of course, teams are made up of individuals who have their own KPIs and their own goals, but teams exist to achieve something no other entity can. So, what is it? And then the fifth discipline, and this is interesting, and I'll expand a little bit more on this, is what I refer to. Discipline 5 is the discipline to develop. And high performing, flourishing collaborative teams take responsibility not only for their own, but for each other's learning, growth, and success. High performing collaborative teams lean into learning with and from one another. They're open to giving, receiving feedback. They admit to their mistakes. They lean into learning from their successes and mistakes. It's about the commitment, the unfailing commitment to build the collective wisdom. And it's interesting, in my assessment, was each time I start working with a team, we do an initial assessment against those 5 disciplines, and we do one after 12 months and 24 months. The scores on discipline 5 have the highest predictive validity on a team's potential and likelihood to transition to flourish. When we're open to learn with and from one another, when we're open to seek the learning in criticism, those teams have the highest potential to transition. So, in a nutshell, there's obviously much that sits behind all of this in the work we do, but those are the uncompromising commitment to these disciplines to sustain a momentum to flourish for more than the time than not.
I really liked a lot of what you just said there, and it's a very well done overview. You may have done that once or twice before.
Here's the thing, Scott. These disciplines apply to individuals as much as they do to teams.
Yeah, no, it makes sense for
So,
sure.
I'm never not asking, am I serving the mandate? What's my purpose?
Right.
How am I showing up? But when we bring these disciplines, because for a team to flourish, each individual has to flourish. So I cannot not be, and this doesn't mean this is easy for me. This means it just makes things more possible.
Yeah.
But it's the uncompromising living in and from these disciplines.
Yeah. No. And one thing I really appreciated that you mentioned was the difference between a group and a team. I really appreciate
Yeah,
that. That really struck home to me because it was like, yeah, because you can see groups, we see groups of people all the time. I'm with a group of people every weekend, but I'm also working in a team every day, right? And it's totally different. It's the why behind it.
It's
So I appreciate
yeah.
that.
It's so interesting, Scott, because in more often than not, when I start working with a leadership and executive team, it's interesting how interchangeably they refer to themselves as a group and a team.
Ah, yeah,
So we can't see what we can't distinguish.
yes,
And only when we see things differently do new possibilities arise. So we stay in that distinction, you know, and it's subtle. And I don't want to paint a group as bad and wrong. No. Groups can achieve, but never what a team can.
yeah, for
Um,
sure. They're not
yeah,
bad or wrong. No, agreed. It's just
no,
it's just different
absolutely.
different circumstances. That's all.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
you did
Mm.
mention one thing, and I heard basically a hint of trust. Now, in the past, I've had a decent number. I'd say I'll say a decent number of former U.S. Navy SEALs on the show and talking about leadership.
Yes, I have listened to some. Yes, interesting.
Right, and they often talk about the balance between trust and competency, and that if you have a high competent person in your team, but you can't trust them, they want them gone. Whereas if you have a lower competent person, but you can trust them, that's the kind of person they want
Mm,
in their team. So I'm just
yeah,
interested to see
yeah.
where you fall in with that type of ideology. How does that fit in with your disciplines? Because SEALs and discipline kind of go hand in hand here, although these are disciplines, so a little bit different.
No, absolutely, absolutely. If we think about this, I put to you in a perspective is teams rise and fall on the quality of their working relationships. And this is so often, and when I work with teams, they look to start with discipline for the results. No. You cannot expect to get a better result before first shifting the quality of the relationship. And I just share that in context because what do we mean by working relationships? And I stand on the shoulders of giants in this respect. And one of them is Gloria Kelly, who brought the eight. She's a preeminent sociologist, and she works with what she refers to the 8 elements of relationships, and these are all expanded in the book Team Better Together. One of these elements is trust. How can a team transition to perform and collaborate and flourish without trust? And then the question is, what do we mean by trust? And one of the most powerful approaches, frameworks to trust is the trust equation by David Meister. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it looks at the 4 elements, and each of these elements carry equal weight. And just very quickly, if we look at this, it's the first is credibility. So how well do I do what I do, and is what I say credible? Have I got the experience and the expertise? The other is reliability. The extent to which you can depend on me, and the consistency with which my dependability. So I can be highly credible but unreliable. It's going to impact trust. Or I could be highly reliable but less capable. It's going to impact trust. Then we get the little gem, and he calls this intimacy, and it's not personal intimacy. It's emotional intimacy. By that he means my capacity to be genuine, to speak my truth to you, to have the hard conversations, to admit to my mistakes, to being humble. Humble leaders say, "I don't know. What do you think?" And I need help. So I can be highly credible, highly reliable, but not authentic and sincere. It's going to impact the trust. And then the denominator in this equation is what he refers to self-orientation. So this is your experience of me. Am I self-obsessed? Is this all about what I think, what I know, what I want to do, or what I want to accomplish? Or is this about my selflessness? I'm vested in your interests. So this is profound, and each of these elements carry equal weight. And if we think about it, if we just draw this distinction, uh, groups focus on credibility and reliability. Teams focus on intimacy and selflessness. Now, that's true until it's not. But you can see, often the credibility and reliability, what I know, my expertise and experience, that's not enough to get me across the trust line. It's my ticket to play. And I often refer to credibility and reliability as the management elements. Intimacy and selflessness are the leadership elements of the trust. And these are the two hands that wash each other. So you're so right. Without it, you're building a team on sand.
No, absolutely. I often say, especially for trust, that's a cornerstone of leadership. If you don't have it, no one's going to follow you. If, and if you
Yeah,
can't trust your team, you're going to be constantly second guessing them, which then turns you into a micromanager. And oh, by the way, the tagline of the show is "Lead, don't boss." So you can probably guess what we try to avoid here. That's not peak
yeah,
performance. That's not peak performance you as the
no,
leader, nor is that peak performance for the team, nor the organization. Micromanagement is
yes,
destructive most of the time. Sometimes you need it, but most of the time it's destructive. So
yeah. But here's the thing, Scott. Let's come back to your three, the sort of alchemy of success: leading self, leading team, leading organization. You know, if we think about this, it's very difficult for me to trust you without first trusting me. So, to what extent am I trusting myself in bringing my perspective, in disagreeing or bringing an alternative view? So, how much trust do I have in my own conviction, my own credibility, my own reliability? Is always quite an interesting perspective. We always look to trust in the context of the other, but you know, what's the trust I have in me?
right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense
Yeah,
actually. And
yeah, yeah,
I often speak in terms of psychological safety, regards to the work of Tim Clark, and he talks about 4 stages.
yeah,
And basically,
yeah,
am I safe enough to challenge? Am I safe? Excuse me, as you described, especially in the discipline 5, developing and learning, he would that would fall for him in stage 4, i.e., challenger safety, where you have the ability. Actually, learning is the second stage, learner safety, where I can make a mistake and learn from it. But I think you're
yeah.
beyond that. I think what you're getting at is actually stage 4, challenger safety, where we can go, okay, you know, what did we do wrong here? What's wrong with
Yes,
the
yes,
situation here? And going back to my earlier comment with the SEALs and special forces people, this is how they operate. They get ready for a mission, an operation. Um, they'll go around a table, and everyone has a right to say something at the table and go over everything, and they'll constantly challenge the plan, challenge the plan, challenge the plan, challenge the plan. Everyone has the right to challenge the plan. They keep going, going, going. Why? Because they can't afford something to be, one, overlooked, or two, minimalized when it was actually an important piece there, because lives are actually seriously on the line here. So that's kind of what
mm,
you're getting at, and it lines up nicely with Tim's work too. Uh,
yeah, yeah. So true, so true. I mean, in a previous life in South Africa at the time, we had military conscription. But because of my psychology background, I'm not a psychologist. I studied it. I was involved in the selection and assessment of special forces candidates. So it was very interesting. You've just sort of triggered back the memory to that time. But this is trust, and I mean in terms of that goes to the essence of one's survival. Um, yeah, yeah.
Obviously, I keep using the military examples because I'm actually still serving regular force Canadian Army. So, um,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, we could have a full conversation just on that and my psychological screening time when I was applying for special forces. Yeah, it was very interesting. I'd love to pick your brain on the other side of that process because I know how
Yeah,
I felt coming out on my end. Let me tell you, I was drooling on myself and not sure if I knew who I was anymore.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
back to the conversation at hand. There are the five disciplines. So again, for the listener, just quickly discover our mandate, discover our purpose, discover our culture, or designer. Sorry, back up. Discover our mandate, declare our purpose, design our culture, deliver our results, and develop our learning. Now, uh,
yeah,
that must be sequential, right? Like you obviously can't develop our learning without getting results or having an understanding of your mandate. Like obviously, to me, this is a step by step kind of process. And now I have Backstreet Boys or NSYNC, one of those bands in my head. But anyway,
yeah,
the moral of the story is like you can't just jump around. So how as the leader would you know? Okay, we're done discipline when we fully understand our mandate. Now let's get into declaring our purpose and moving on and moving on and moving on.
yeah. It's interesting, Scott, because so often when I engage with executive teams, there's a seduction to discipline for deliver. And then I point out that this seduction is because they're showing up more as a group and less as a team. But I don't want to be prescriptive in this. There's a strong preference in the sequencing. But what we can start at discipline 3, designing our ways of working and move back to our purpose and discover. But what we'll never do is start with discipline 4, deliver. That will be the last thing we do, because if we accept the perspective, teams rise and fall on the quality of their working relationships. To get a better result, you've first got to shift the quality of the working relationship. It doesn't work the other way around. It doesn't work the other way around. So what we will never do is start with discipline 4. We end with discipline 4.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me now, especially the start part. I could see why people out there would be keen on that and start looking at that immediately. But to me,
Yeah,
if we're focusing on the results, then
yeah.
are you focusing on the right results? Is the first question,
Well, exactly,
right?
exactly. If I'm not clear on my purpose, if we're not clear on the mandate, we may be chopping the trees in the wrong forest.
Right. And I
Yeah,
I really like the Indian snake story for these type of scenarios, right? Where when the British had India colonized and there were too many snakes and they started, okay, we'll pay you to bring in snakes to decrease the population. Like, okay, people go out, whack snakes and bring them in and we'll pay them and that'll get rid of the snake population. Lo and behold, they made a black market for snakes because people started
yeah,
breeding them
yeah,
in their homes. And then once they realized what they had done, and they said, okay, we're not paying anymore. And then they ended up with like 5 times as many snakes slithering around India.
yeah,
Right. And it's
yeah.
really like, okay, well, are you focusing on the right result? you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. But I think, just coming back to your question around, how do we get teams to see and commit to a particular sequence? I spend and I'm unapologetic about this, an uncompromising amount of time before engaging with a team in a discovery process. Meeting with team members, they do the 5 discipline assessment, so we collect a lot of data. And before we commence, I will share that data, highlighting common themes and trends. And it's invariable that the themes and trends sort of typically move in the sequence. And through that initial an analysis phase. There's lots of understanding that's facilitated, and commitment. Because this is a journey that requires an inordinate amount of commitment, dedication, time, and effort to transition to a sustainable, flourishing team, flourishing more of the time. Yeah, this is not about flourishing all of the time. That's naive. That will never happen. But if I guess coming back to this paradox, if we can shift flourishing from 20% of the time to 40% of the time, there's a world of infinite possibility of what can be accomplished. Infinite. Just flourishing 40% of the time. And that is possible, but it's hard work.
No, it absolutely is. Um, you get the results where you put your time and energy, right? In the
Totally.
Canadian Forces, when I was a young officer, we heard this saying, the 90-10 rule,
Mm,
which I despise
mm,
now, by the way. The 90-10 rule is this: 90% of your time gets taken up by 10% of your people when you're in a command billet. So,
mm,
so when I was a squadron commander of 200 members, I said, all right, folks, everyone, and I spoke to my junior officers and my senior leadership corps. So, all right, everyone know the
mm.
90-10 rule? They're like, yes, sir. I'm like, we don't have that rule here. Take it, crumple it up, throw it out. And they're like, what? I said, we have the 90-90 rule. The 90% of our time is going to be spent on 90% of our folks. That other 10%, they
Yeah.
want our time. They want more of the, they want out of the 10% of our time realm. They want to get into the 90 pie. They got to come across the road and become part of the 90. And
Well,
that's how I
yeah,
ran
yeah.
and pushed my team. I said, this is what we're going to do because this is it, right? Let's focus.
Well, yeah. I think that's a beautiful sort of metaphor and analogy, because flourishing, collaborative teams embody 1990.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
They they commit to one another. They invest, not only in the deep appreciation of the diversity of thinking and skill, but the deep appreciation of the interdependence. Whereas groups focus on independence. Um, they value more their individual contribution than their collective capacity and capability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah.
I could totally see that in that terms. And, groups are very
Mm,
much more individualistic. And probably that's how I find, that 10% probably looked at the team vice it, the
mm,
rest of us
mm,
looking as a
mm.
team in your context.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a little bit of a sidebar. It's still very much aligned with
Mm,
high performing teams and what you're talking about here.
mm,
And I'd
mm,
like to get your
mm,
thoughts on hiring people and screening people and stuff like this, because not everyone operates at the same level. Not everyone has the same competencies. Not everyone is necessarily trustworthy, as we all know, so on and so forth. So how does the whole hiring, screening, that whole process from your point of view come to play in the with these five disciplines, and how we form our teams and how we kind of meld? Because if we get that one bad apple in there, well, the old saying, that it's a saying for a reason, right? Because there's true, one bad apple will spoil the batch. um, so we need to
mm,
find that right away and get it out, per se. So I'd like to get your thoughts
mm,
on that and the hiring process and how we can maximize that to maximize making a high performing team.
mm. Yeah. Interesting question, Scott. What's coming to mind is high performing collaborative teams. Just as much as it is important for the team to select the candidate, it's equally important for the candidate to select the team. So, what I mean by that is know deeply what you're committing to. Now, I know this isn't possible, but in the ideal world, and I mean, maybe not in the ideal world, but the selection process, invite the candidate. Obviously, should this be a shortlisted and preferred candidate, invite the candidate to sit in a team meeting. invite the candidate to just observe how people engage teaming together and apart. Invite the candidate to deeply see what value they're going to bring to fulfilling the purpose. Invite the candidate to deeply demonstrate how they exhibit the ways of working, because these become very explicit. They identified, and this is not about sort of cloning. This is about the the capacity to discuss the undiscussable. So how do we show up with one another? So I think in answering your question, I think it's the selection process is mutually relevant. We are both selecting each other. So how do we provide the opportunity for the candidate to make the most informed decision? Is this a team that they're going to add value to? Because once you're in it, there's a very specific expectation around the uncompromising discipline and commitment to these disciplines.
That's a definitely an interesting take on that point of view, and not something I've heard per se in the past, but I definitely can see the value of it. Bringing someone in before,
Yeah,
and unfortunately, like all the hush hush around the hiring process this day and age is
yeah,
hindering that. Now, as our job as leaders is to find a way to get around that, stop using those as excuses, and let's figure out a way to actually achieve the results that we want. And I liked your thought
yeah,
process there. Like, okay, show people what it's like for a day, for a week at the
yeah,
job with the
yeah,
team, and say, and then bring them like, what do you think? Right, do
yeah.
we think you could be a fit, but do you think you're a fit? If not,
And how would you fit?
yeah,
And how would you add value? And how would you elevate this team? It's the same thing, Scott. I always, you know, when you look at mergers and acquisitions and the due diligence process. Now, I'll declare my bias. I mean, the balance sheet will get you to a point, and the P&L, and yeah, you've done all the numbers. No, 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 no. Just go sit in the executive team meeting. That's the best due diligence you will ever do. See what's on the agenda and not on the agenda. See what they speak about and not speak about, and see how they converse and relate. Um, I think that would be the most profound form of due diligence ever done, notwithstanding the importance of the P&L and the balance sheet and all of that good stuff. But it guarantees nothing.
no,
Nothing.
I absolutely agree. But all right, my friend, this has been a great conversation, but unfortunately, all good things come to an end. Uh, but before we wrap up, I do got a couple last questions for you. The first being a question I asked all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, and that is, according to you, Bernard Desmidt, what makes a great leader?
What makes a great leader? I think there are four things that come to mind here: determination. And when I say determination, this is not a selfish pursuit. This is the belief in what's possible. And the other is a deep sense of intuition. Trusting the deep sense of wisdom that we bring. Accessing one's essence, and trusting one's intuition. I think the other, probably most importantly, is the curiosity. How open am I to being influenced, to shifting beliefs, to showing up as a beginner? What does that mean? To show up accepting what I don't know. And I guess the fourth would be our capacity to engage. And we spoke about trust. We spoke about the intimacy. It's how do I leave people feeling after each conversation with me, each engagement with me? So I think determination, intuition, curiosity, and engagement are the hallmarks of effective leaders and dare I say effective teams.
Oh, that's great. And a final question of the show: how can people find you, follow you, be part of your journey? Feel free to pitch the book. It's all about you now.
Yeah, no, lovely. Thank you, Scott. Please, jump onto the website www.bernarddesmidt.com. There's a heap of collateral. There's a little quick team quiz. Takes you 30 seconds, and you'll get a quick snapshot of the team descriptor as you see it. Subscribe to my weekly blog. There's topics and themes of teams and leadership. So, or alternatively, just get in contact with me, and should you wish to pursue this conversation, be only too happy to do so.
And for you listeners, always, it's easy. Just head to lead.don'tboss.com/237, and the links are in the show notes. Bernard, my friend, thank you again, sir. It's so great to have you on the show today.
No, thank you, Scott, and deeply appreciated and privileged to be on your show, and trust your audience have found this of value and interest.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.